One of the things that when I set up Eurasia Group, one of the things I tried to do very carefully was figure out what mechanisms I could use to ensure that analysts wouldn't be biased, that analysts would actually be forced to say what they really thought. And one of the things we did was we went after hedge fund clients early, because hedge funds have no long-term perspective at all. They only care about stuff that's going to happen very, very soon. And if you're an analyst, you're a lot more honest if you find out if you're right or not tomorrow. If you're talking to a government division you don't know for 5 years, or ExxonMobil you don't know for 10, who remembers? And you're going to shade it. It's critical that you get away from that sort of stuff, especially in the field where most people that study Russia are from Russia. Most people that work on China are either pro-mainland or Taiwan or Hong Kong, and those people are worse than useless for us. They're actively pernicious to our model. So you have to work against that.
So about a week and a half ago, I was in Provence. I sat next to Jean-Claude Trichet, the head of the European Central Bank. He's on his way out in October, probably going to write a book, get big speaker fees, move on to his next phase. I tried really hard to get him to talk about the euro. He wanted to talk about the modern staging of La Traviata, which he liked, and why Le Monde was wrong in its review. But I couldn't get much out of him. What do you think, as we've talked a lot about the Eurozone, what matters, what doesn't, whether every bank and financial institution will essentially be socialized and guaranteed eventually to the point where then the central bank doesn't really play a function anymore. But tell us a little bit, you don't think the debt limit is going to go under here, but what about the Eurozone?
Well, one of the reasons that I'm more bullish on the dollar medium term is because the euro is in such trouble. I don't think the Eurozone is going to fragment. I certainly think that there's going to be continued crises. So I was in Helsinki 2-3 weeks ago at the European Business Leaders Conference. All these CEOs do it once every 2 years, and it was a fantastic conference. And I had some private time with Olli Rehn, the European Monetary Commissioner. And I started with him, and I said 3 things. And I was not kissing up. I believe all 3 of these things. I may have been kissing up a bit, but I believe all 3 of these things. Number 1, I said I believe that he has the hardest job, the most challenging job of any senior policymaker in a developed country, number 1. Number 2, I believe that he is doing about the best job I could possibly imagine given his circumstances. And number 3, it is not at all clear to me that that's enough. What am I getting wrong? I asked him. He didn't suggest I was getting much wrong. I think that the best that they can do is continue to muddle through, which would be okay if it wasn't being done with the full blare of the Klieg lights and the markets watching every moment and being prepared to jump, and the credit ratings agencies doing the same. So I think that at the very least, you're going to continue to have crises in the periphery. You're going to certainly have more crises in Greece. And that's going to be very difficult to have a workout that's going to be, sort of constructive and easily organized. Now, I don't believe there's going to be a liquidity event because the money's there. I think that there's going to be a political crisis because the ability to get all these countries lined up quickly when the markets are squeezing them just isn't there. Different electoral processes, different types of actors, different willingness to tolerate moral hazard, all of that sort of thing. In the United States, the reason I'm not worried about a debt limit crisis is because if you play chicken, if you're against a homicidal killer, you don't get in the car, right? But if you're against someone and you know that person is not going to crash against you, then you drive for a very long time, but ultimately you don't crash. The problem is you never notice in game theory, you never play chicken with more than 2 people. It's messy. And the Europeans are playing chicken with lots of people.
Right.
And they don't know. I mean, they all know that they're all committed to the euro, and they're all committed to bailing each other out, but how do you decide what the ordering principle is? And the answer is you don't. Now, here's what I think is the interesting question, because we all know that there are a lot of people out there that are committed to the euro. We've seen all these CEOs in Europe that have written these letters saying that it's definitive that we have to have the euro. It's really important to us. You've seen European sort of state leaders saying that they're committed to it. You've had, of course, the IMF and the ECB and all the rest. But there's one group out there that, in my view, is more committed to a strong euro than anyone else in the world, and that's China, because China desperately needs an alternative to hedge against their dollar exposure. And so here's the question. is when the euro gets in trouble, when the Europeans really have the crisis that pushes them, what do the Chinese do? And what do they ask for in return? What is the conditionality of China with Germany? That's what I really want to know. I think that's really important. I think it's very important. I think anyone that believes the Chinese won't be there when things get ugly, they're absolutely wrong. They will be there. But it could be life-changing, right? Could be NATO changing.
I mean, these are huge geostrategic, systemic issues at play.
Sure.
And another element of it, as I see it, when you look at the mess in Europe, and you look at Germany, which is major surplus country, export monster, consumption is, in my view, not where it should be. You look at China and how it's organized itself and the deals that it's doing, not only in Europe and what will likely be there, but all around the rest of the world. And it's not, and it, in my view, continues to based on what I read in your book, you know, dwarf and hold down consumption, pump out, continue exports, and basically try to do trade and debt deals with the rest of the world so that they buy Chinese products. Where does the demand for U.S. products and the U.S. economy come from? I mean, you've seen deleveraging continue in the United States. Europe is obviously not going to be a growth engine that will, you know, where does demand come from in our side?
For Chinese products, you mean?
Well, yeah, well, no, for the U.S. economy. Where's demand come to buy, to help? I mean,
where does U.S. consumption come from?
You've addressed Europe.
Yeah.
You've got China there
right.
with a part of it is, and when we look at the U.S. economy, because inevitably this is the ecosystem in which we're operating. What's very scary is there's no mechanisms that I see out there right now to basically figure out how do we use the rest of the world to jolt us out of the stagnancy we're in.
That is an issue. I mean, if you're looking at the U.S. recovery right now, and it's looking pretty stagnant, pretty anemic. Though a lot of productivity and efficiency numbers for multinationals based in the U.S. looks okay actually, because they've taken their rolls down and they're not building them back up. What I'm basically suggesting is you look at Japan. Japan's doing poorly. You look at Europe. Europe's doing really poorly. And you look at the Chinese, and they're hedging and diversifying away from the U.S. to the extent that they can. That may bode well for fast-moving U.S. multinational corporations and their productivity and profit line because they're effectively global. I mean, look, the Japanese economy can go down, and the Nikkei can do okay because a lot of it doesn't always, but because a lot of Japanese corporations are functionally not really attached to Japan anymore. I mean, Toyota doesn't. I mean, they have its nominal headquarters in Japan, but they don't do anything there. It is a completely an outside of Japan company, and a lot of U.S. corporations will increasingly look like that. And of course, the U.S. is an economy that the demographics in the U.S. are good. And so, I mean, just immigration and birth rates in the U.S. does actually create some stimulus. And American R&D, of course, is still in expenditure terms vastly greater than anyone else. So of the next big things that will come that will spur the global economy, more of them will be in the U.S. than anywhere else. You can make that bet. But how good of a bet is that? How comfortable do you feel making that bet in the context of all this other stuff that you're talking about, Steve? Less comfortable than you used to. Now, the only thing I can say to make you feel better is that in the context of other stuff out there, and I don't just mean the U.S. and Europe and Japan, everyone. So the mantra for the last 3 months has been kicking the can down the road. How many times have we heard that? On how many cable news shows have we heard kicking the can down the road? The Americans on debt and deficit kicking the can down the road. The Japanese doing the same thing with their reform processes they did before the earthquake, kicking the can down the road. The Europeans kick. All true. But no one is kicking the can as far or as hard, and no one has as big of a can as the Chinese.